My name's CK Eidem. I'm with Ducks Unlimited. I'm a regional biologist. I cover Western Washington from Canada to the Columbia and the coast out to the crest of the Cascades. So lots of seas. This is a case study duck project that we did in the Snoqualmie. Ducks Unlimited is a continental waterfowl conservation organization. We restore and manage wetlands and associated habitats for North America's waterfowl. We're in Mexico, the United States, and Canada. And it was started in 1937. There was some hunters in the Midwest that realized there weren't as many ducks, and they went to figure out why there weren't as many ducks. And they realized some of the wetlands up in Canada were being damaged. So they started organizing banquets and raising donations to send money to Canada to improve duck habitat. Since then, we've conserved more than 15 million acres. Last year alone, we had 565 acres of habitat conserved. We have 600,000 members and 52,000 volunteers running 45,000 events that run money for, that raise money for waterfowl conservation in North America. There are a couple ways that Ducks Unlimited divides up the land where ducks breed and winter. Those are priority 1 habitats. And in places where the ducks migrate, that is a level 2 priority. And Western Washington is level 2. The ducks migrate through ants. So here's the agenda. We're going to go over basic duck stuff. We're going to talk about waterfowl needs and waterfowl conservation in general. And then we're going to dive down into one of the programs, federal programs called NACA for waterfowl conservation. And then a specific project that resulted from one of these NACAs. So basic duck stuff. Washington waterfowl are comprised of 27 species of duck, 6 species of geese, and 2 species of native swans. Those are trumpeter swans right there. Then there are the dabblers, and those are the ducks that you probably think of when you think of a duck. They're the ones that they tip up and they dabble on the surface of the water eating biofilm and seeds. Those are the most common waterfowl in the state, and Western Washington has a lot of them, but specifically Snohomish, Skagit, and Whatcom County have most of the waterfowl in Western Washington. And we have sea ducks. We have 11 different sea ducks during migration time in the winter. And then we have certain species that also raise broods and molt within Washington waters. And then we have 5 diving ducks here in Washington. And a diving duck is a duck that actually dives under the water to feed. So those are ducks. The annual cycle is pretty important to understand on as far as conservation. So this is it's a neat chart. What it shows is the year based on solstices and on equinoxes and where the ducks will be. So if you look at the chart in Western Washington, and there's 2 kinds of ducks. I should have stopped. Just stop for a second. There's resident waterfowl that live here year round. So those are the geese and the ducks that live on the golf courses and in the ponds. And then there's the migratory waterfowl that are coming from the breeding grounds to the wintering grounds. And that's where the main conservation need is making sure those animals are happy and healthy as they're moving between those 2 areas. So this chart shows where a migratory waterfowl will be in the landscape conceptually. So right now can you see my mouse, my pointer?
Yep.
Okay. So right now we're about here at the vernal migration. So they're leaving the wintering grounds and passing through Washington and a whole bunch of other places to go up to their breeding grounds. And then they'll stay there all summer. And then right around the middle of October, they're going to start moving. And that changes a little every year depending on the weather. If it's colder, they'll move sooner. If it's warmer, they'll stay because they're happy up there. And they'll start moving through and they'll be back in Washington. And then they'll go, in our case, usually mostly to California. So they'll stay in the wintering grounds in California and then go back to the breeding grounds. And so we see the big pulses of ducks and geese and shorebirds approximately in here. And it depends, each species is a little bit different. It depends on the weather. There's a lot of different things. So what do breeding grounds look like? So this is the prairie pothole region. I think this is Alberta. Don't quote me on that. But each one of these little ponds in the prairie landscape has a couple ducks and a breeding pair, and they raise their broods. And they do this in the prairie potholes and they do this in the boreal. And that's where they spend most of their time. And then they come down and they hang out in California or on the Gulf Coast or the lower Mississippi, and they look for places with lots and lots of food. And so they're hanging out, getting fat and happy in order to go back. So this is what it looks like on a map. The red are the breeding grounds, the green are the wintering grounds, and all the yellow are the migratory corridors. And so they just kind of, they fly for a while and land and eat, and then they fly a little farther and they eat, and they're usually being pushed down by the cold weather. So as the ice comes, the ducks move further and further south. So what do they want with us? What do ducks want with us? Primarily food. They want to eat and they want to rest and they want to get fat and happy for the next stage of whatever they're doing, either wintering or breeding. And ducks eat all kinds of stuff. Aquatic plants, biofilm, fish, mollusks, slugs, grains, seeds of native plants. They have a wide variety of needs. On the way from the breeding grounds, they're really just hungry. They want easy calories. So they really like the grains. And then on the way back up to the breeding grounds, they want to store up on protein. So they're really looking more for invertebrates. So they have slightly different needs on both routes, but they're mostly looking for calories. And they get their calories in wetlands. So most of the preferred duck habitat is shallowly flooded, early emergent wetlands. So they have lots of seeds, lots of invertebrates. They come and they forage there. That can be a tidal flat, that can be the edge of an estuary slough, it can be a beaver pond, it can be a seasonal wetland, seasonal, early successional, so when the plants are first disturbed and they have lots of seeds, early successional plants have a lot of seeds and make a lot of bugs. And when they flood up, that's pretty much ideal duck habitat. But in Washington, most of the ducks get most of their food on farms. And so farms mimic that early successional wetland. They are disturbed every year. Most crops are early successional plants. And once they get a little bit of water on them, they become really, really good duck habitat. And so farms are pretty important to waterfowl in Washington, and they get most of their calories on farms. So how do we conserve waterfowl? How do we help them migrate? In Washington, it's really about farm preservation and wetland restoration. So if we can keep farmers farming, if we can get some farmers to manage for waterfowl, if we can get some practices that are a little better for ducks than just really hardcore farming, that's great. So one of our major efforts, like in Eastern Idaho, is to keep folks from moving to pivot agriculture and keep flooded grazing land intact. So flood irrigated grazing land is really important to waterfowl there. If it doesn't exist, those ducks don't have a place to go. In Washington, it's a little more subtle, but it's kind of the same idea. If we can encourage crops that are a little better for ducks, if we can encourage seasonal flooding, that's wonderful. But just having farms is the bare minimum. And then with wetland restoration, we're really trying to target wetlands that have an early successional element to them. So even planting scrub shrubs that we know beavers are going to come into and chop down the trees, and then we're going to get an early successional phase in that wetland is super vital. So trying to figure out how to restore wetland processes and wetlands that make an early successional stage at some point in their development is pretty key for us. So how is this all managed and thought about? It's pretty complicated. In 1916, there was a treaty between Canada and the United States talking about how to manage game birds, included Mexico in 1918. So international treaties are part of it. It's organized by these things called joint ventures, which divide these flyways up. And there's no quiz, so don't worry about it. And if you have questions, let me know, but it's super high level. We have all these flyways that think about and organize the landscape. We have several different kinds of plans, some for water birds, some for shore birds, some for land birds. And these all are administered and run by the joint ventures. Who's on the joint venture? It's usually state game agencies, provincial game agencies, nonprofits like Ducks Unlimited and Audubon. And they basically try to do the same thing a lot of salmon planning does in Western Washington, where to prioritize and think about the landscape and figure out conservation activities to happen. Pacific Birds is really focused on like open prairie habitat and coastal wetlands. That's kind of they've decided those are the two things they're going to think about. It extends from Northern California up into Alaska, including BC. And then we also, in the Pacific Birds Habitat Joint Venture, we get the islands. So Hawaii and Midway are part of that. So I can't read this because it's covered up, but this is the disturbance of birds in the North Pacific coast. And this is the NAWAMP goal. So this is dabblers, NAWAMP. So North American Waterfowl Management Plan goal. And you can see this pie chart divides the North Pacific coast into different parts. And our part, which is the Puget Sound, we have about 30%, 31% of the birds between the Oregon coast, the Willamette Valley, and the Lower Columbia. That works out to be about 744,000 ducks. And this is that midwinter, that's the migration from the breeding grounds to the wintering grounds. There's another goal for the wintering grounds. Wait, did I say that right? From the breeding grounds to the wintering grounds. And then there's another one from the wintering grounds to the breeding grounds. Again, there won't be a quiz, and this is supposed to be high level. So how do we pay for all this? And that's pretty interesting. Waterfowl management is usually done through hunting dollars. There is a law that was passed during the Great Depression that put a tax on ammunition and certain hunting goods, and all that goes into managing waterfowl. There is a special stamp that you can buy. I don't know if anybody's seen this John Oliver special, but that's talking about the duck stamp. And so the feds have a program where if you buy a hunting license for duck, you have to pay a little bit extra money to get this duck stamp. And there's a competition for art that goes with it. It's pretty interesting. The other thing is the state has a duck stamp, and those traditionally go for waterfowl management. Compared to some other programs, it's not a huge amount of money. And in the early 90s, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started a program called NACA, which is where we're going to spend a lot more of our time. So NACA is the North American Wetland Conservation Act. It is targeted at migratory waterfowl and other bird species and wetlands. So it's really about conserving wetland habitat. It's targeting declining or rare wetlands. And in Washington, these are just Ducks Unlimited NACA programs since the 90s. So we've had quite a few, and I don't know if this is even a complete list. I've only gotten to work on basically 4, the North Olympic, the Skagit Lowlands, the Central Puget, and the North Puget Lowlands. There's a lot more. Some of the old Snohomish ones are pretty pertinent to a lot of the work we're doing today. And projects that I know have had some kind of NACA touch include Spencer Island. Some of the breaches were paid for with NACA dollars. A bunch of the wetlands in French Creek were enhanced using NACA dollars. Acquisition at Lekwe Island was initially done with NACA dollars. There's some problems with NACA, and there's some real cool advantages. One of the biggest advantages, if you do an enhancement project or a restoration project, that has a 25-year window on it. So when you do the work, it's only expected to last for 25 years, and then all the easements and encumbrances go off of it. And that's primarily because a lot of what you do for waterfowl is active management. But the acquisitions that you can do through NACA are in perpetuity, which is a really long time. So acquisitions, if those are written in such a way, can be difficult. Like at Lekwe Island, we had to, DFW primarily had to work with US Fish to work out some deals because they said they were going to manage that site for snow geese forever. And you could argue that Lekwe is really good snow geese habitat, but it's not exactly being managed just for snow geese. So there was some complications with that easement. But NACA is a really cool tool because you can do an easement, you can do an acquisition, you can do on the ground project, pays for engineering. You just have to turn dirt in within the time of the grant. So you can't do a lot of planning with it or maintenance. So here's an example of a NACA that I got to work on. It started in 2012 and ran through about 2018. It was in the Skagit. And we did some really cool stuff up there. Like we helped Skagit Land Trust acquire a big wetland complex called Barney Lake. And also we got to restore Trumpeter Creek with them in Skagit County and the Skagit Conservation District. The thing you'll notice about NACAs is the individual projects aren't called projects, they're called tracts. And so this one had 8. It had 11 different partners. It conserved about 482 acres. The grant was $1 million and the match was about 2. Some of these are pass through, so you can use NACA dollars. Like if Ducks Unlimited got it, we just gave the land trust the dollars to acquire Barney Lake. Some of it DU did the engineering. So like we engineered Trumpeter Creek, but then the county got ecology money to actually build Trumpeter Creek. And so each one of these different tracks, projects has kind of a different mix. They're fairly complicated, but most of the work is stuff that everyone here would be really familiar with. And the nice thing about match in a NACA is it can be old. So it can be up to 2 years old. So it's a really good place for folks to park match that they have but don't have a place for. Another one I got to work on was the Central Puget NACA. That was 2013 through, I think, what is it, 2019. And that was 11 tracks, 12 partners, 476 acres, $1 million and about $2 million in match. This one was focused on really the Snoqualmie. There was a lot of floodplain reconnection. We worked really, really closely with Wild Fish, providing them a lot of money for the Langlois Creek naturalization, Waterwheel Creek naturalization. Sound Salmon was also involved in that one. Wild Fish did the Stillwater floodplain. So our engineers designed removing bank riprap, and then Wild Fish managed the project. So that was a couple thousand feet of bank riprap on WDFW and a neighbor's property, allowing the Snoqualmie to occupy a couple hundred acres of oxbows that it had been isolated from. Helped with dense willow planting at Beaver Marsh. This was a pretty cool one. It was very fish centric, and it was a lot of pass through. So we would give money to other entities to do the work. And the NACA we're working on now that's winding up is the North Puget. So this has 13 tracks, 12 partners. The acreage went way up to be competitive now, because we're competing with North Dakota and Missouri, you need a lot of acres. So this one had to be pretty big. It was 1,491 acres is what we're gonna eventually claim. One of the biggest helps on this one was we got to use Smith Island as match. And that was huge. So you see the ones with asterisks on the project list, those were primarily match projects where we didn't have a lot to do with it. Like Herbert was more or less a contribution from the Snoqualmie tribe, where they had a riparian hayfield that they had bought, and they were doing some riparian restoration, and we were able to count those acres and the dollars as match. Smith Island was the same way. They had a whole bunch of, or the county had a whole bunch of extra match sitting around, and that was 400 acres. So out of this, we're probably improving 900 acres, and we're counting about 500 acres from other people. And then a lot of this you'll see on here is managed farm drainage. So Snowwater was in Snohomish County on EB Island. Our outlet is in King County. Golstead is in King County. Cherry Valley is in King County. Stillwater is in King County. A couple of these are DFW properties. Snoqualmie Springs is in King County. Duval's in King County. A few of these are in Skagit. So another cool thing we're doing is with WDFW's Spartina crew, we're helping them remove cattail in Skagit Bay. So they're doing a bunch of invasive removal that is leading to passive tidal marsh restoration. And then we help Skagit Land Trust with a riparian project up on the Skagit. We counted some forested wetland acquisition. So it's kind of a whole bunch of different conservation activities that can fit into a NACA. And what we're going to talk specifically now about, kind of the case study, is Snoqualmie Springs. And I think this is, as far as a managed drainage project, this is the poster child for what I think can happen in Western Washington with a Ducks Unlimited project. So Snoqualmie Springs Farm is at the confluence of the Tolt and the Snoqualmie. It's about 140 acres of total land. The farm itself is about 130 acres. And what we did is we worked with the landowner. He had us out to see what we could do with bird conservation. He was very interested in how could we make the farm better for ducks. And the first thing I told him was to get a hold of the King Conservation District and start working on a farm plan. So he met with a farm planner who's now in Skagit County named Emmett Wild, and Emmett and the landowner started working on a farm plan. That was the first step. The next thing that happened is we were able to write him into the NACA for managed drainage. And we'll talk about that a lot in a second. And the Snoqualmie Valley Watershed Improvement District noticed they had this really cool pond and started talking to them about a different project element for water storage. And I noticed there was a whole bunch of riparian restoration that could happen on the site. And the Conservation District brought in King County ADAP program, the Drainage Needs Program there, and started looking at the drainage issues that were happening because the ditches were completely filled with reed canary grass. So this is a map of the farm with the different elements we ended up doing and some of the associated restoration projects nearby. And I'll talk about this a lot more, and we'll bring this up for discussion. But you can see the riparian restoration is labeled 1. It's pretty long, and it's enhancing kind of riparian stuff that's already happening. We've got this water storage lake, water ski lake. So that's number 3. Number 2 is all the ag ditches. Those got cleaned out of reed canary grass and kind of accumulated sediments, but not past what had been done before. And then they were all planted with riparian hedgerows. We had 3 water control structures put in. We protected the land through a NACA, basically an agreement to manage it for 25 years. We did the farm plan. We have been able to leverage that into some additional riparian work. Sound Salmon is leading the charge on getting grant funds for the Audubon property to the south, the A and B, and working out management agreements with the landowner. It ties in really well with that central Puget NACA. ENF were tracts kind of off the map, but adjacent that were worked on under that NACA. And then D, which is over here, is Langlois Creek. So that's the Wild Fish Conservancy naturalized stream channel. So here's the Tolt, here's the Snoqualmie, the river's flowing that way. There's Snoqualmie Springs. So here's from the bridge of the Snoqualmie looking south. You can see the riparian exists. It's kind of older and not so good deciduous trees and lots of blackberries. So what we are doing with Sound Salmon, primarily Sound Salmon is doing the mussel work. We're enhancing almost 6 acres. And what that looks like is taking out 3 acres of blackberry, adding a whole bunch of more plants. But the buffer width is really important here. Part of the buffer is really narrow and part of it's pretty wide. And what we were trying to do is work with the landowner in order to at least get that first little bit of buffer planted. And so we use NACA money for the narrow buffer. And NACA, they're targeting land birds. They're targeting, different little Tweety birds that are part of the Partners in Flight plan. So any kind of riparian is good for them. So we use that. And then as the buffer widens out, we use cooperative watershed management money from the county to plant wider portions of the buffer. So they never planted anything narrower than about 60 feet. So the narrower buffer in the north part was NACA. When it gets wide and fat, that is with cooperative watershed management funds through King County. And it maintained the ag footprint, and it's pretty long. It's a lot of river that's getting covered. Now this is the managed drainage elements. And I don't know if anyone had a chance to watch the video. What this is you take existing drain tiles. In this case, you can also put it on a open swale or open ditch, but you put a box at the end of it. And what this box does is it allows you to control the water table, the water behind the water control structure. And you put individual boards that, depending on the system, they can be 1 inch or 6 inches, and anything in between. And you put these individual boards into this to raise and lower the water level. So if you wanted to shallowly flood the farm for ducks, you would just raise the boards until it's shallowly flooded. If you wanted to drain it so you could get out there and plant something, you'd lower the water level. And then after you lower the water level to get planting out, you might want to raise the water level back up so you can store water to sub-irrigate, so you get irrigation water underneath. So this just gives a farmer a lot of tools. It also allows solids to settle out before it gets back in the river. So it's an alternative to a V ditch or an open ditch system, or even drain tiles, but drain tiles do a pretty good job filtering that kind of stuff. It allows you to cycle nitrogen fairly well. I mean, just like any kind of nitrogen cycling, you have to be a good farmer to understand how to do it. But this gives you another tool in the toolbox to cycle nutrients and nitrogen. It has a lot of water quality benefits, also suppresses weeds, reduces the amount of herbicides you might need out there. So drainage water management is a pretty cool tool. It's not a silver bullet, but it does a lot of stuff. And on this farm in particular, it affects the shoulder season. And what the shoulder season is those couple weeks in May, April that you really want to get out to plant crops, because if you don't get the crops in, they won't have enough time to get harvestable. Your corn won't fully grow. So you've got to get out there early enough to get the crop in. And that is unpredictable. It depends on the weather. It depends, you know, if it's been raining, how wet the ground is. But if you know you can control the water in your fields, you can get the water off. And then in the fall, it's exactly the same thing. If it rains a little early and you've still got standing corn, you can't get the corn off. You can't drive the equipment out there to get the corn off. So that shoulder season is really important. So those few weeks at sowing and harvesting time are critical for farm operations, and having a being able to control the water to this degree helps with that. The other thing is the landowner here is very focused on waterfowl, and he wants to see water in those fields in the winter. So you know you're going to have the flooding in the winter because of the landowner. We'll hit on that in another minute. This is a little bit more on drainage water management and what it does: winter weed suppression, sub-irrigation, settle solids, improves nutrient cycling. It makes reliable conditions, and it has what wildlife benefits. The other big thing that happened out there was fairly narrow hedgerows. The ADAP program from King County, as part of the ditch cleaning process, they have a lot of protocol for making sure that it doesn't damage aquatic life, but then they also require hedgerows. And so they've got hedgerows now on the entire system, which they didn't have before. So I think most folks in this room know about what the benefits of riparian habitat and hedgerows are, but again, it really reduces maintenance needs, it improves water quality, and it creates a lot of habitat. And in this particular case, it's really good for shade. And next. Now this is kind of the funnest one. So there's this giant lake that one of the previous landowners built. And the reason he built it, it said, is to water ski. And there's some stories out there where he did water ski. And you can see that this whole area could be flooded. There's a water control structure here that doesn't quite work anymore, but this pond was the water ski lake. Now, it happens that that landowner also was first in line for a water right. So the SWID, the Snoqualmie Valley Watershed Improvement District, is trying to figure out how to trade water up and down the basin. They bought water rights from Weyerhaeuser. They've got all these water rights, but if you are upstream, you can sell water to anybody. If you're downstream, it's a lot harder. And so there is a way around it, but you have to find somebody that can mitigate the base flows. So you need to be able to add water back into the river if you're selling if you're downstream and you're trying to sell to somebody upstream. So this is a strategic place for them to store winter water in order to supplement base flows in the Snoqualmie. And it's all way above my head. There's a lot of water laws and water rights and all kinds of stuff going on, but Ducks Unlimited has offered and maybe taken up on helping with the water control structure in order to maintain and regulate the flows on this lake. The other cool thing that the landowner is already doing is he loves wood ducks, and he's started to build wood duck houses, and they have 30 pairs on this site, which is pretty phenomenal. So the water ski lake, also called Foster Pond, is a pretty neat part of this whole project. So why did the landowner do it? Well, number one, this is an investment property for him. He was looking to buy some land, and he wanted to make a piece of ground that he knew he could lease to a dairy farmer. So this is a piece of ground that is very good for silage corn. Some of the cows that get this corn make the milk that makes like Beecher's cheese, and so this is it's a working dairy support. It's a very active silage operation. He also loves migratory waterfowl. So he bought this because he likes to hunt. That's what was informing his investment. He wanted a place that he could manage for waterfowl. And he also likes elk, and there happens to be a ton of elk out there. And he loves wood ducks, and he loves his dog, and hunting waterfowl helps him spend time with his dogs. Sorry about the cat. So here's a map of the site again. Now that we've talked about it, you can see how these all play together, but you can see the riparian hedge where it's wide, paid for by King County, where it becomes narrower and is paid for by NACA. The ADAP program that paid for all this ditch cleaning and hedge planting. The water control structure is also paid for by NACA, and allowing this specific area to be very easily flooded and then dried out. This is kind of the wettest, hardest spot to farm. We have easements or an agreement that says this has to be managed this way for at least 25 years. So there's some certainty on management, and that this will be farmland. This area up here couldn't have been farmed until after the ADAP happened. It was too wet. It had been farmed in the past, but because the ditches had filled in, it wasn't being able to farm. So he has a farm easement on this whole property, and King County has goals of adding farmland. So this helped King County's farmland goals. It's facilitating conversations with the neighbors and improving more riparian habitat down here, which is all covered in blackberry and invasive knotweed. So that's more or less the project. And it was really getting a landowner whose interest was in farming and waterfowl connected to the wider restoration community. So getting King Conservation District out there to do the farm plan and enrolling him in the agricultural drainage assistance program, getting Sound Salmon Solution to apply for money to repair the riparian, getting some flexible funding sources with NACA and different ways to manage the water on the site was really important. Having the SWID come in and help him with drain tiles that were not functioning properly anymore, and advocating for water storage on the site was big. So this project really took a lot of different people and different interests and skill sets to bring to fruition. Oh, and there's the last slide. So that's the end. Open for questions and comments and snide remarks.
Great, thank you, CK. David, did you have a question?
No, but I did see that Guillaume had one in the chat right here. Does this mean, and this was pertaining to the water balancing on property there. Does this mean that water conservation practices in ag lands might be at odds with DU's goals for migratory habitat?
I was actually, thanks, David. I was actually specifically asking CK about when you were mentioning in Idaho, how changes in irrigation practices from flood to pivot would pose a problem. And I was wondering if that meant that they're kind of at odds in that way.
Yeah, well, and that happens all over the country. We are, well, just in Puget Sound alone, you know, the most important two things for ducks are tidal marsh and farmland, and those don't always get along. And so I think the same thing in Idaho. There is some concern with switching from pivot to this flood irrigated. Flood irrigated is less water efficient than pivot systems, and so there often are conflicts, and so Ducks Unlimited has a lot of different ways we peel that apart. And I don't want to speak too much for the biologists there and why they made those decisions, but a lot of times it's just improving the efficiency on existing systems in irrigated places, and others we're trying to push on different practices. But for the waterfowl in Idaho, it's really important to have those flooded irrigated fields, because if they don't exist, there's no water. It's not like here where we're always trying to get the water off the farmland. there it's really actively trying to get water on farmland in order to facilitate the migration.
Thanks.
And I suppose that would be true in eastern Washington too, where the leaky irrigation canals and things have resulted in some ponding in various places, right?
Yeah, and we try to use those. We're trying to, number one, conserve water. That's a big thing we're doing, especially in California and the Klamath. We're really trying to make those systems more efficient. And then also where there is wastewater or irrigated areas, we're trying to do that in a smart way and reuse water that's already been used. So there's a lot of irrigation waste practices that we do.
Ralph is wondering if you can talk a little bit more to the group about nitrogen cycling.
Ralph would be better at that than me, but I can try. So if you have too much nitrogen in the soil and you have too much water, you can actually leach it. If you have the right amount of nitrogen and water in the soil, you can actually make it inert and go into a gas that's good. And so, like I said, you still have to be a good farmer and understand how to use your nitrogen, but this is a tool that would allow you to better manage your nitrogen. It isn't a silver bullet. You couldn't fix everything with it, but if you use the right amount of nitrogen, you actually could make again, I'm not as good with the nitrogen cycling as somebody like Ralph, but my understanding is you could make a gas that is not a greenhouse gas with anaerobic conditions in the soil.
Yeah, CK, I'll just note that I'm getting really, really rusty on all this stuff. So thanks for the reminder on that. I just note that, we've got this Puget Sound nutrient source reduction project, and we are spending more time now thinking about nitrogen that's coming out of the watersheds. So you know how much I love this project and managing groundwater in a way that it can also stick around a little bit more for the summertime. But we need to keep an eye on what's happening with nutrients as well, since we're looking at them a little bit differently.
Yeah, and you and I have talked about this. This is a study need that we have. We think this does all kinds of wonderful things. We have some evidence from other parts of the country on how it works. But it would be really nice to prove it one way or another. And then also, if it's not doing everything we think it's doing or having negative impacts, how can we make that better, right? Because these systems we're trying to improve management and trying to get more tools in the landowner's hands for managing nitrogen and managing water. But we also don't want to have negative impacts. So if there's basically there's room in the system to mitigate for things that are bad, but we need to know how to do that.
DK, before you go on to Kurt's question, I wondered if you could just tell us, does the farmer believe that you can really see those managed, tile structures working? Because early on we were going to work with the WID, we couldn't follow through with it by putting some deep piezometers in, and just kind of verifying what's going on. Any reports at that level?
Well, he actually was able to harvest and plant this year where he hadn't before. And then when he wanted to hold water, he held water. So the water control structures are doing that. So just from being able to plant and being able to harvest, it worked really well. The farmer and the landowner were very pleased. And we've had similar results where we put variations on this system in other places. As you know, and we've discussed, this isn't the easiest thing to permit in this part of the world. And so we haven't had as wide of a sample size as I'd like, but so far it's proving at least the agronomic benefits are there.
Thank you.
Great, and Kurt has a few questions. The first one builds a bit off of what you're just talking about. Is there any post-project monitoring to determine project success?
Not exactly. we don't have anything physical. We're basically checking in with the landowner, making sure everything works for the farmer and for him. The ADAP program has pretty stringent monitoring requirements for the hedgerow establishment, as does the CWM process for the riparian. So we're going to be piggybacking with Sound Salmon to monitor the NACA plantings. But if it's working for the farmer and we know it's attracted, I mean, that place was full of ducks. So we don't have anything formal. But again, that's something I'd like to, everybody knows it's really a lot easier to get money to build something than to monitor it. So monitoring would be great.
Great. And I see Kurt's hand is up.
Yeah, I wasn't, CK, I wasn't talking about necessarily the spring farm project. I'm talking about other projects that Ducks Unlimited has built. Like you mentioned, several other NACA packages that have been previously built, whether they're successful based on monitoring, and if monitoring has shown that different methods appear to work better than you know, other methods, things like that.
Yeah, I guess that really depends on the project. The earlier the project, the less monitoring, and some of them have actually moved out of their 25-year window where they're considered an active NACA project. Yeah, I don't think, I know there's not a very thorough monitoring program for most of those, but a lot of the projects in NACA are about easements, and so the more managed structures are shorter lived. I guess there's so many different kinds of projects, there would be lots of different ways to monitor it, but we make sure that, for example, if it's an acquisition, we do check that the property is not being turned into a Walmart, and they're doing what they said they do, but we don't have any formal way of measuring most of that.
I had a couple other questions, like on the pond on Spring Farm. Where does that water come from? Is it hyporheic?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, at most of the water is collected from rain, but there are springs. That's why it's called Snoqualmie Springs, and some of the drain tiles pick that spring water up and move it out. So that they really don't try to hold water until it starts to rain, if that makes sense.
And so all the drain tiles go into the ditched area.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Does any of those drain tiles and that ditch system interfere with stream flow in Langley Creek?
No. Well, if it did, it would be very surprising. Yeah. Yeah, because the drain tiles are draining the fields around the ditch system, and Langlois is on the other side of the property.
But one branch of the ditch system actually was very close to Langley Creek.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, kind of in the back corner there.
Mm.
Yeah.
CK, this is Ralph again. With those,
Yep.
Would you describe, or do you think the farmer would describe the previous ditch, the tile network as not functioning at the time you started the work? Because I guess it's one of the things I wonder about is that, is a managed drain tile system better than a drain tile system than an older one that's deep and just gets rid of all of our groundwater? It makes, Kurt's question in my mind goes to that a little bit, that, yeah, when you crank it down, so you can get onto the field, that seems like a more likely time to have some other localized, groundwater, driven influence like on Langlois. But when you raise it back up, compared to what was there, an older drain tile system, does it actually maybe help get water back in the Langlois, that might otherwise have gotten drained off, from peripheral groundwater, removal?
Yeah, and that depends a little bit on management, but the old system is just an old drain tile system drains the groundwater to whatever that tile's at. And those tiles were functioning okay, but they weren't great. So it was a semi-broken drain tile system, but it was still functioning. And they were existing tiles. And so we put the tiles back at the same elevation, but now we've got this water control structure that allows that water table to be higher. And so most of the year, I would say the water table is higher than it was, including during the growing season. But at certain times it's back to the old height. So the old, what the old drain tiles were designed to. And that's in order to facilitate farming.
Yeah, I just finished with one last thought, and that is,
Yeah.
I think that's a monitoring need for the future.
Mhm.
I wish I could have done it in the past. But I do think also that, farm plans, hopefully, I don't know when Emmett wrote that a long time ago. I know Emmett's long gone, but that should be part of the farm plan, I guess, is, hey, put these back to this level as quick as you can. And it's part of that, that working cooperatively, I see potential benefit of helping farmers do this, with the understanding that they'll be managed properly.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So we have just a couple minutes left and a couple things in the chat. First, Kari shared that the Snohomish Conservation District Youth Art Contest has a theme of birds this year. She
Cool.
put a link in the chat if you want to follow up with that. And then Gwendolyn is wondering about phosphorus loading in the water due to large flocks of ducks, and if there are any efforts to monitor water quality of conservation efforts to benefit ducks.
No, that's a really good question. So the waterfowl are in the system already. We're going to have these waterfowl moving through. So one of the things is, where are they concentrated and how are they being concentrated? And I defer to a lot of the work that ecology has been doing on that. And we don't see that as a major issue, but we might be biased. But this project is not, especially because we have these closed drain tiles, it's not getting the water back into the system, it's going through the soil. So that's a monitoring need, I guess.